All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's a pleasure to have you all. And this is our event of the PILAP speaker series, in which we bring issues of rights to the forefront and discuss with experts about different issues related to the public concern. So today we are going to talk about rights of person with disabilities. We have Mr. Omair Ahmad, who is the CEO of NOWPDP with us. So before we kick off the conversation, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Saad to speak a little bit about PILAP, its background, and what it is trying to do here in Pakistan. So over to you, Saad.
Thank you, Akarni. I'll just take a few minutes. I think most of the people at least attending right now know about us. But basically, I think something new that has happened is we have actually created basically a footprint of PILAP, which historically has been very Karachi-centric. We have created an office in Lahore now. ठीक है ना, जिसमें Amna is online right now. She's a lawyer. She's based in Lahore. We are getting a researcher as well, joining her very soon. We have an office there as well. We have an office in Karachi. And inshallah, once we have enough funding, we'll open an office in Islam. So we Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad se hum start karenge. And if we end up with more funding, we'll probably go to Peshawar, Quetta, and other places as well. But this will make it pan-Pakistan. And that's why my membership drive has been in Islamabad and Lahore. And public interest is all about protecting and promoting the fundamental rights of the citizen of Pakistan. There are like 25 fundamental rights in our constitution, and nobody seems to be, looking at them. And this is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that we also need to educate our youth and the young people. Because as they grow up, if they come with the right mindset, the right DNA, a lot of these problems will actually not even happen. So we've done some work on citizen right. We've invested and we've got a complete syllabus for schools from class 1 to 10. But anyway, that's something, if anybody interested, let me know. I'll pass it back to Waqar. Please introduce Omair and let's start the session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Saad. So yeah, moving on to today's topic of conversation, rights of persons with disabilities. So we have the CEO of NOWPDP with us. NOWPDP is a leading organization in Pakistan addressing and talking about issues of rights of persons with disabilities and addressing those concerns. So Omair, thank you very much for giving us your time and being with us. This is very helpful and we are pleased to have you. So to kick off this conversation, I know we also have a slide deck to go through and some slides. So I'd like you to introduce yourself as well, a little bit about your background and how you have come through this journey and where you are currently. So if you can summarize your intro.
Sure. Thank you, Waqar and Saad for the introduction and for the run-through of PILAP. As I was mentioning before, I think we have been at front row seats to the growth of PILAP in the last few years. And it is very heartening to see the work that is being done, because we do feel that the fundamental rights and the protection of rights of all individuals or citizens of the Federation is very important. And for people to be aware of what rights they hold is something that I think is fundamental to that cause. So again, thank you for inviting us, NOWPDP, network of organizations working with persons with disabilities. I have been associated and affiliated with NOWPDP for the last 10 years. My background itself, like Saad Saab's in so many ways, is financial services. I was in the US. I'm a product of the liberal arts education system when the concept of liberal arts meant fine arts in Pakistan. And I worked in New York and Virginia in financial analytics for about 8 years. Working on an area that I felt was bringing employment to Pakistan for a company called S&P Global, which is located in Islamabad, and setting up the global operations. The reason I joined the non-profit sector when I moved back to Pakistan was because I feel what we are doing has to be done on a more urgent level when it comes to including marginalized communities in society. We have not, I feel, pursued inclusion across all stratas of society with the urgency that it needs. And I think partly it's also due to the fact that we feel strongly, and I feel personally, that we need to run the non-for-profit sector as clearly as the for-profit sector sometimes, so that every dollar, every rupee, every pound that is spent in the development sector goes to something concrete, constructive and sustainable and scalable. And that's how, the concept and the idea of NOWPDP came together about 15 years ago. I took up the charge of the organization about 10 years ago, and the idea was to make it sustainable and scalable, so that we are not only a network of organizations connecting persons with disabilities based organizations, but we are a sustainable programmatic based organization that creates ecosystems of inclusion everywhere. And the idea and the notion that we have is we have built it in such a way that it's not personality dependent. We make sure that it's sustainable and scalable. We make sure that not only the urban areas but the rural areas benefit from it. And we feel at the end that innovation is at the heart of inclusion when it comes to marginalized communities. Whenever you pick out a marginalized community, I think persons with disabilities are probably at the lowest end of the spectrum of that. When you talk about women, women with disabilities are 3 times worse off. When you talk about impoverished children, children with disabilities are 4 times worse off. And when you talk about unemployment, the rate of unemployment in persons with disabilities is near the 90 to 95% rate, as is a lack of education, which is at 90 to 95. So the scale of the issue is so tremendous that we are but a drop of in the bucket. But we feel if that drop is sustainable and scaled up and replicated by the government and other like-minded institutions, then we can achieve a lot more in a very, very short time. So now PDP is an ecosystem of inclusion. We've been working for 15 years across Pakistan. Our objective is to ensure that disability is part of the narrative of marginalized communities being included. And we hope that a platform like PILAP can advance the rights of persons with disabilities as they've done with many other marginalized communities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Omair, for the introduction of your and now PDP. So this is all very helpful. And so it's the concept like person with disabilities, it's like hard for a person who to wrap their head around that who are the people, like what is like the broad categories in which we can classify PWDs and like person with disabilities. So like it's and I was just reading this article a couple of days ago which mentioned that our census has done a very poor job at documenting the person with disabilities. They are they are not fully accounted for. The figures they are underrepresented. So could you speak like about it, that what are the different categories and what is the true number out there which we are looking at? And I can put up the slide if that helps.
Please, I think, if we can, I think since we have a very close-knit audience, if you will, I think it would be okay to have a conversation also in the middle, because I think it's very important that we have the dialogue be open. And I think Sadhsa at your discretion, but I think if people feel like they want to have some questions and queries in the middle, I would encourage those. We don't have to wait till the end, because I think it would make for more healthy conversation and dialogue. Just like
one thing I would suggest is using the Zoom facility, just raise your hand. And if somebody raises the hand, we'll give him an opportunity to ask the question. So just speaking in the middle while you're talking. Thank you.
Right. Acha, so yes, Vakar was asking, somehow categorizing disabilities is, one of the first parts of the question. So when we talk about disabilities, many countries have very different definitions. In Pakistan, we break it down into about 5 to 6 categories. We talk about intellectual impairments, which are, which was historically called mental retardation, which is now no longer used. We talk about visual impairments, people who are blind. We talk about hearing impairments. We talk about hearing and speech. So speech can be classified as another disability. So usually it is sometimes equated together, the hearing and speech. If person is deaf, they can't talk, but they're two different things. Then you talk about physical, which I think are most commonly seen, wheelchair users and so on. And then I think the other thing that we have to be very mindful of is neurodevelopmental, the hidden disabilities, where we talk about things like, dyslexia and so on and so forth. So these are broad categories of disabilities that we work with in Pakistan. These are the 6 broad areas that we break it down. Now, when it comes to the definition, and I think the definition that you see in front of you, you can see that what starts as discrimination starts from the disability definition as well. So you're automatically, the first step, you're categorizing a person as normal or not normal. And I think yahi aapko nazar aa jata hai कि the issue and challenge in 2002 with the national policy was defining persons with disabilities as not being normal or not having an ability, वहीं आपने तफरीक पैदा कर दी, वहाँ ही आपने you have created a segment of the population that is cut off. And I think that's where the notion of them and us starts. Over time, I think in 2011, we can move to the next slide, if you will. We can scroll down. Uh, the World Health Organization, if you come back, the World Health Organization, and I think this is what we are now ratifying, the United Nations, classifies it in simple words. इसको मैं ज़्यादा तफसीली तौर पे नहीं बताऊंगा, ये बहुत ज़्यादा heavy language इस्तेमाल होती है. To put it very simply, it's mindsets, mental blockades that people have, like people without disabilities, and the environment, the architecture and whatnot, combining to create a hassle for a person with disability to formally engage with society. So attitudinal barriers and environmental barriers are two very important things that make a person with disability not fully participate in society. And I think this is the actual definition कि उनकी अपनी कोई ability कम नहीं है, वो लोग not normal नहीं है, हम चूंकि अपने मुआशरे में वो रसाई पैदा नहीं करते जहनी तौर पे, या ही आपकी architecturally speaking that precludes or excludes persons with disabilities from actively participating. And I think this was what now Pakistan in 2011 ratified and made their national policy. So हमारी 2002 की definition थी, it got waylaid, and this definition actually became the focal definition of persons with disabilities. कि a person with based on handicap and impairments could now not interact based on environmental and attitudinal barriers, and that is the definition that we utilize now. Next, I think if you will look at अच्छा numbers की बात कर रहे थे हम लोग. Now the scale that we're talking about here, all across the world, 16% of the world's population is persons with disabilities. That's over 1 billion people if you think about it. And these obviously also include mental health concerns, people who are going through mental health issues, and they're classified as this under this ambit as well. But even if you take that number out, if you will, then 12 to 13% have the 6 types of disabilities that I mentioned. Now 16% आपकी आबादी दुनिया की किसी न किसी माजूरी में मुब्तला है, उसके अंदर से 80% reside in the global south, the terminology that is used these days, which is not the advanced and OPEC and advanced countries. जैसे मैंने आप लोगों से पहले कहा था, 90% don't have education, the children, 90% don't have jobs. So just imagine that over 1 billion people, almost close to 1 billion people, are not economically enfranchised or do not have access to education. Now that in itself should be a jarring number, because you know why I come back to the same point again and again. कल ये वो चीज है, ये वो minority है where any one of us can become a part of it, based on an accident or some calamity that befalls us. So a person, when they plan for a society, when they plan for people with disabilities, they're planning for society at large. Old age में आपकी बेहतरी आ सकती है. Expectant mothers benefit from accessibility and better environments and attitudes when it comes to disability. So when you create a universally designed accessible society, you are also helping disenfranchised people, you're also helping older people and allowing them to integrate better in society. So 16% abadi, 80% resides in our parts of the world, 90% plus don't have jobs or access to education. That in itself should be something that gives us a sense of urgency trying to resolve this. Next slide, please, Waqar, if you will.
Yeah, just a question here,
Please.
if I may. So, I mean, yeah, I think you're addressing that in the next slide as well. So I'll let you go. Yeah.
ठीक है. अच्छा, when it comes to population and census, आजकल there's a lot of talk about delimitation and talk about census inclusion of the 2023 census. I think a large part of advocacy also has to be, how are we including people? Are we counting people? Do we have the right amount of people that we have to keep in mind when we're making decisions? 1998, when the census was conducted, 2.38% of the population at that time was considered persons with disabilities. Now, that number, when you think about 16%, that's 8 times less, almost 8 times give or take less, 7.5 times less. और उसके मुताबिक 3.3 million persons with disabilities showed up on our national census. So 3.3 million people with disabilities are as per the 1998 census. आप आए 19 साल बाद 2017, the population has actually dropped of persons with disabilities and less than a million people with disabilities. हम कौन से तरक्की याफ्ता ममालिक में हमारा शुमार हो गया है कि ओवरनाइट इन 20 years हमने अपनी आबादी को सिर्फ 10 लाख तक ले आए. मतलब कि it's a miracle. It's a miracle and I think that shows the scale of the issue. आप सोचें कि आपको वो लोग जो 30% से आबादी 30 times से आपने आबादी गिरा दी, तो what can be the reason? I'll tell you what the reason was. There was a form that was issued जिसके तहत आपकी न्यूमरेटर्स ने डेटा इकट्ठा करना था of persons with disabilities. The question for person of disabilities not asked as jarringly as we sometimes think in our head, but asked in a very open manner, was not put in the questionnaire. And when it wasn't put in the questionnaire, a family which is already reluctant in sharing that information about a child or a person with disability will even be less forthcoming about sharing that information. And as a result, the Supreme Court had to be petitioned the night before the census started कि आप ये category add करें, and with a pencil it was added in certain forms and most others it was completely absent. So our population actually dropped. The only country in the history of the world where the population of persons with disabilities has gone down with many multiples. Uske andar se, how many people are actually part of the NADRA database? Because we have access to the database, we have seen it, 3.5 lakh log सिर्फ NADRA के database में मौजूद हैं. So 30 million की आबादी आपकी 32 million की आबादी है, जिसके अंदर से 9.5 से 10 लाख लोग 11 लाख लोग मौजूद हैं in your as part of your census. उसमें से नादरा के पास सिर्फ 3.5 लाख लोग मौजूद हैं इनके पास national database. So when you think of policy making, what PILAP's focus is, imagine how will you advocate for policy and policy changes when the numbers are not reflecting the scale of disability in the country? Why would anyone advocate for that? Why would it be a topic that is taken up in the national or provincial assemblies, in the legislatures? Why would it be taken in the executive branch when we are not even counting the people or giving them a platform to actually showcase or tell us what they need from us? इसका नुकसान क्या होता है? इस आबादी को ना गिनने का नुकसान by simple mathematics of taking the minimum wage, multiplying it by the adult population of the country is about 4.9 to 6.3% of your GDP. जो कि अगर मैं आपको 2015 का नंबर बताऊं, was coming out to be 11 billion, 11 अरब pound a year. Imagine that a part of the population that with the right accommodations can be included in your workforce. I'm not saying all of them can, but a part of them can. By excluding them, you are actually taking on losses of tens of billions of pounds or dollars by simple calculation. And that is where we are at the moment. So Waqar, I don't know if that was your question, but 2.5% आबादी हमने पहले गिनी थी, और आधी फीसद आबादी हमारी 2017 में हुई, 1% आबादी 0.1% आबादी हम लोगों ने नादरा में ऐड की. नुकसान आपको नजर आ रहा है, और कितने लोग हैं जो कि हमारे अपनी एक्सपीरियंस में, just to give you some context, we work in one of the most disenfranchised rundown districts of Pakistan called Sajawal. It's about 2.5 hours out of Karachi, next to Thatta, one of the poorest districts, but also it was cut out of Thatta in 2012, so one of the newest districts. नादरा का डेटाबेस कहता है कि 1500 अफराद बहा माजूरी उस डिस्ट्रिक्ट में मौजूद है. Just a small organization like NOWPDP 2 साल 3 साल काम करने के बाद हमने 4,500 लोगों with माजूरी हमने आइडेंटिफाई कर लिए वहाँ. So if you have the aptitude, if you have the drive, if you have the desire, you can find the people. If you have the right questions, if you have the right facilities. So all in, this is where the biggest problem arises from कि हमारा जो loss to economics and the uncounted numbers are not being counted just because there's no aptitude or appetite to count these numbers. Was that your question, Waqar? जी, जी.
अभी जो last year, how was have they taken with disability?
जी साथ साहब, आई थिंक उसके अंदर एनेक्डोटल एविडेंस जो हमें बताई गई है, एनेक्डोटल एविडेंस के अंदर ज्यादा लोगों से सवाल नहीं पूछे गए. पीपल दैट वी नो हु हैव चिल्ड्रन विद डिसेबिलिटीज एंड वेरी विजिबल एंड present disabilities, they're standing, the child is standing with the parent and the numerator is there. इन्यूमरेटर से नहीं गिना। फॉर्म्स के अंदर अलबत्ता 17 क्वेश्चंस थे, which was a comprehensive form. There was actually the questions were built in. So पेपर वर्क में अकाउंटेड फॉर था, लेकिन ट्रेनिंग नहीं दी गई थी न्यूमरेटर्स को कि सवाल किस तरह से पूछे जाते हैं, जो कि एक पर्टिकुलर तरीकेकार होता है कॉल्ड द वॉशिंगटन ग्रुप ऑफ क्वेश्चंस दैट इज आस्क्ड बेस्ड ऑन व्हाट वी डू इन द यूएस. सो आंसर टू योर क्वेश्चन, anecdotally speaking, I don't think there will be a huge change in your population numbers that are counted, but from a form perspective, at least if you're looking for small wins, the form did have questions regarding persons with disabilities in a more diplomatic and a conducive manner.
Then I wonder कि हमारा census का data जो आता है, how good that is. Because if people are not trained properly, ये तो खैर आप people with disability की बात कर रहे हैं, there are a lot of other ethnic
बिल्कुल.
issues. So the data is, and I know the lack of governance that is, rapidly nepotism भी है, हमारे अपने मामे चाचे के बच्चों को लगा देते हैं to get money.
बिल्कुल.
Let's move on. But thank you for giving us a perspective.
ठीक. नेक्स्ट पकार, इफ यू प्लीज, थैंक यू. अच्छा, अब कवानीन की बात करते हैं थोड़ी सी. सो आई जस्ट ब्रेक द कॉन्वर्जेशन डाउन इनटू टू पार्ट्स. हमारा जो पहली ऑर्डिनेंस जो पास हुई थी which paid attention to persons with disabilities was in 1981. अब आप में से मैं अगर पूछूंगा, चूंकि it's a small audience, I will ask, why do you think in 1981 this ordinance was passed? Why in this year of all the years do you think? इसकी
I would
गवर्नमेंट थी
say
उस जमाने में.
Ziaul Haq, and I would say maybe because of the Afghan-Soviet war and injuries from war, maybe. That's my
That's
guess.
that can be one reason. Anyone else?
No idea.
Okay.
Probably
So
Ziaul Haq's personal at home.
बिल्कुल सही, बिल्कुल सही, बिल्कुल सही. ज़ियाउल जी.
अच्छा, ज़ियाउल हक की बच्ची थी.
जी. सो बेसिकली आपके अपने घर पे जब ये चीज हुई थी, सो अपनी उनकी जो एक बेटी थी, शी वाज अ पर्सन विद इंटेलेक्चुअल इम्पेयरमेंट्स, दैट वाज देयर इन द हाउस. दैट इज व्हाई द फर्स्ट टाइम एनी लॉ और एनीथिंग रिफ्लेक्टिंग अ लॉ वाज पास्ड वाज इन 1981. जो आप साथ साथ बात कर रहे थे ना, चाचे मामे और उन सब चीजों की, अ लॉट ऑफ दोस थिंग, इसको इस तरह भी अप्लाई कर सकते हैं आप कि जब तक अपने ऊपर आके नहीं पड़ी, तब तक हमें ये एहसास नहीं हुआ कि कितनी बड़ी पॉपुलेशन मौजूद है जिसको हम गिन नहीं रहे. So that was the first time that the ordinance was passed. Now, why is that such an important ordinance that was passed? क्योंकि जो उसके बाद subsequent laws पाकिस्तान में anything reflecting or impacting disability बने, वो इसी की बदौलत बने हैं. Accessibility Code of Pakistan 2006 में बना था. ये तब बना था जब हमारी enlightened moderation campaign चल रही थी, जब हमें कुछ ऐसी चीजें बनानी थी which appeal to the global audience कि हम काफी काम कर रहे हैं marginalized communities के लिए. And that accessibility code is the one that is now largely used for creating infrastructure accessibility across Pakistan. So अगर आप buildings में ramps देखेंगे तो उसके मुताबिक बनते हैं, बनने चाहिए, बनते हैं नहीं बनते ये एक अलग बात है, बनने चाहिए. लेकिन हम सब जानते हैं कि जब हम स्लाइड्स की बात करते हैं तो पार्क के स्लाइड्स दिमाग में नहीं आते, रैम्प के शक्ल में जो चीजें नजर आती हैं एटीएम्स के बाहर, वो दिमाग में आते हैं हमारे जो. और इसके अंदर और बहुत अच्छी इंफॉर्मेशन थी जो कि थी. सो फेडरल लॉ नंबर 1 वाज 1981 ऑर्डिनेंस, नंबर 2 2006, नंबर 3 यूएनसीआरपीडी, जो मैं आपको डब्ल्यूएचओ की डेफिनेशन बता रहा था. UNCRPD is United Nations Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. इसको हमने साइन किया था 2010-11 में और 9 में, और रैटिफाई किया था 2011 में. रैटिफिकेशन का मकसद ये होता है आपका करने का कि नाउ यू आर सपोज टू डिलीवर on your commitment. You are not only a signatory, you're supposed to deliver on this commitment and submit a 3-year report on how you're making progress on these goals. While we have not done any of those, but as a signatory, we are now eligible to provide updates and use terminologies that are more reflective of the global standards. जिसकी वजह से definition भी जो मैं पहले बता रहा था आपको, attitudinal और environmental, has come about. That was the third thing that was made. And the last thing, the most recent thing that I feel very proud of from a NOWPDP perspective is the State Bank Financial Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities Regulation, after 8 years of खटखटाएं all banks के और state bank के दरवाजे, we finally had the first lady, Mrs. Samina Alvi, and the President of Pakistan taking disability along with breast cancer as one of the most important areas, and ensuring that the State Bank Governor of that time, Dr. Raza Bakir, and all the banking presidents made this a priority topic. Because as a bank, ना ही आप एक सर्विस प्रोवाइडर हैं, बट आपके सबसे बड़े एम्प्लॉयर भी हैं पाकिस्तान के आफ्टर द गवर्नमेंट. सो फॉर पॉलिसीज, अगर आप बैंक अकाउंट खुलवा सकते हैं तो आप एक तरह से काउंट हो रहे हैं आबादी के अंदर. सो यू फ्रॉम अनबैंक टू बैंक. सो फॉर अस दिस वाज अ ह्यूज अचीवमेंट कि द पॉलिसी दैट वी हेल्प क्रिएट as a representative of the NGO and the social development sector, and with the state bank and the banking sector, finally became actual regulation that the now state bank and all the banking sector institutions are following. So federal point of view, so national point of view, so ये चार major pivotal laws रहे हैं. 81 2006. जी साहब,
Where I have a
question.
question. मतलब ये फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन मुझे समझ में नहीं आया प्रॉपर्ली, बिकॉज disabled people can go to a bank and open an account. It's not disallowed. So what benefits are they giving for a disabled person that now they will actively open a bank account? I mean, sorry, can you explain that?
श्योर. अमूमन होता क्या है साहब कि कहा जाता है कि पर्सन विद डिसेबिलिटी कैन गो एंड ओपन अ बैंक अकाउंट, बट जब ये बैंक ब्रांचेस जाते हैं, जो हमारे अपने भी एक्सपीरियंस और हमारे कॉलीग्स के रहे हैं, या तो आपका जो सामने अकाउंट ओपनिंग अफसर बैठा होता है उसको साइन लैंग्वेज या कुछ नहीं आती, वो बात नहीं कर सकता, विजुअली इम्पेयर्ड है, वहाँ वो कहते हैं कि टेक्निकली यू आर कंसिडर्ड illiterate, even though you might have a master's or PhD, because you can't sign your name. So the definition of literacy is signature of your name, but a visually impaired person can't physically sign it. They might have a PhD or educated. So इस तरह के बहुत challenges इनको दरपेश होते थे, जो हम लोग ने कहा था कि इनको we need to overcome.
यार हमको पता भी नहीं है चीजें, सीरियसली. I mean, you know, normal people we even come across these issues. It's good that you. जी, Amna, you're asking something?
Umair, I'd like to know, do they have these braille kind of ATM cards, or have they introduced that for the visually impaired, koi checkbooks and
Or account opening forms in Braille, for that matter.
So of all of these four things, Ms. Amna और साथ साथ account opening forms अब आ गए हैं ब्रेल में कुछ बैंक्स में. डेबिट कार्ड्स एंड क्रेडिट कार्ड्स स्टिल विदाउट वो, बट टॉकिंग एटीएम्स कुछ बैंक्स ने लगा दी हैं, स्टैंडर्ड चार्टर्ड ने और इन्होंने, बिकॉज वहाँ कुछ पर्सन्स विद विजुअल इम्पेयरमेंट्स काम भी कर रहे हैं. बट लार्जली स्पीकिंग द बिगेस्ट चैलेंज जो हमें बैंकिंग सेक्टर के साथ फेस हुआ था व्हेन वी ट्राइंग टू पास दिस रेगुलेशन वाज फॉर विजुअली इम्पेयर्ड पीपल. उनको बेसिकली ट्रीट ऐसे किया जा रहा था कि उनको वो 2 साल के बच्चे हैं कि उनका वॉलेट छिन जाएगा, उनका ये हो जाएगा, उनका कोई उनसे चोरी करके ले जाएगा. सो जो हमारे कॉलीग्स थे विद विजुअल इम्पेयरमेंट्स, दे सेड वी आर 18 years old, we are adults, we have signed, we are, you know, adult contributing citizens, we go and we have traveled all our life on public transport and we are chashamdeed gawah of these. Give us that autonomy. If we are signing off that we need an account and we have our responsibility, then give it to us. So the long answer to your question is the braille forms exist in bank branches, but the problem sometimes is not a lot of visually impaired people are braille educated. So ये एक भी misconception clear करना बड़ा जरूरी है. braille सिखाई अगर नहीं जाए तो वो हर एक को नहीं आती. So the counter that we say is कि आपके मोबाइल पे डिजिटल ऐसे एप्स एड ऑन्स आते हैं, so talking software that can talk back to you, so you can add those things to it and have someone who's a digital representative talk to you through that. But yes, now forms because of this regulation are being added on, but not to the scale, because हमारी प्रिंटिंग कैपेसिटी नहीं है ब्रेल की इतनी कि हम इतने ज्यादा फॉर्म्स निकलवा के यहाँ प्रोवाइड कर सकें, और जहाँ प्रोवाइड भी किए हैं वहाँ टीचेबल opportunities नहीं है for visually impaired, so there has to be creative bridges that we create there.
Thank you. Thank you.
नेक्स्ट, सो ये आपके नेशनल लेवल लॉस थे. अब डेवोल्यूशन 18वीं तरमीम जब से आई 2010-11 में, सो अ लॉट ऑफ द डिसीजन मेकिंग वेंट टू प्रोविंसेस. उसके अंदर से जो एक टॉपिक जो कि प्रोविंशियल ऑटोनॉमी हो गई, जिस पे मिल गई जिसको, इज डिसेबिलिटी. और उसके अंदर आपका जो नेशनल डायरेक्टरेट ऑफ स्पेशल एजुकेशन था उस वक्त, वो टूट गया सूबों के अंदर स्पेशल एजुकेशन और सोशल वेलफेयर के दरमियान. तो सोशल वेलफेयर को उनकी वेलफेयर मिली, स्पेशल एजुकेशन को उनकी तालीम मिली माजूर अफराद बहा माजूरी के. एंड एज अ रिजल्ट these two were formed, but they were constantly competing because there was no standard law that was allowing them to work. So what we did was we worked with a lot of partner organizations, and with WHO and the provincial governments. We created a comprehensive law, which is now almost the same across all your 5 territories जो आपको सामने 6 territories जो सामने नजर आ रही हैं, with some minor differences which I can highlight as well. कि employment का number डिफरेंट होता है. सिंध में 5% है, इस्लामाबाद में 2% है, कैपिटल टेरिटरी में, गिलगित में 3-4% है, खैबर पख्तूनख्वा में. बट बाय एंड लार्ज द लॉज आर स्टैंडर्ड अक्रॉस ऑल प्रोविंसेस. सिंध इससे एक और स्टेप आगे भी आ गया. सिंध ने स्पेशल एजुकेशन और सोशल वेलफेयर से डिसेबिलिटी को लेकर एक नया डिपार्टमेंट क्रिएट कर दिया जिसका नाम है डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ पर्संस विद डिसेबिलिटी, DEPD, जिसका पूरा मैंडेट इज फॉर इंक्लूजन. सो सूबाए पंजाब में, बलूचिस्तान, KP, गिलगित बल्तिस्तान और इस्लामाबाद में स्पेशल एजुकेशन अलग है, सोशल वेलफेयर अलग है. Sindh is a little ahead of the curve and has one department that caters to all problems and issues related to persons with disabilities. So that's what happened on the provincial level.
Just a quick
and
question.
please.
आपने कहा था कि like there is a percentage that every company should have, like 2%, 3% different. Are companies following that?
I will come to that in the challenges, but I think the short answer to your question, no, they're not. No, they're not. And I think
I know they're not, but what can we do? I think PILAP can play a role there as well.
So, जो हमने 3 मेजर मैक्रो चैलेंजेस अगर आप कह दें जो हम लोग ने अपने आइडेंटिफाई किया हमारी वर्किंग में, जो मैं आपको बताता, अनकाउंटेड नंबर्स, you know, that's something that is a significant challenge. So if you are not counting the numbers and you're not having them represented and identified, then there will be no change. Implementation, this is in response to your question, Satsab. Laws और कावानीन बनाने में, I think Pakistan ranks, like our official numbers on disability, probably top of the list, you know, better than most OPEC countries and the global north. But जब हम बात करते हैं implementation की, standard operating procedures की, rules of business की, they are practically non-existent. So anything that you see on paper versus what we see in practice is absolutely worlds apart. There is no credible implementation of the comprehensive regulatory framework that is built, and that is the area which needs the most support. And the last thing where we have identified is zehni mizaji taur pe, or architecturally speaking, we continue to put up walls and barriers for persons with disabilities to engage. I'm not just talking about ramps. I'm talking about a visually impaired person not being able to utilize a public transport. Some do, most don't. An hearing impaired person not being able to communicate with the ease with someone who's sitting right across from them. And I think these are the challenges that if you think about it, अगर मैं आपको आखिरी वाले पॉइंट का बताऊं, हमने आर्किटेक्ट्स के साथ एक सर्वे किया था, इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ आर्किटेक्ट्स पाकिस्तान. कोई बिल्डिंग को रेट्रोफिट करने में खर्चा आता है 15 से 18% बजट पे ऐड ऑन हो जाता है, which is significant in add on. But if when the blueprints are being finalized, if you add accessibility to it, only 0.3 or 0.4% budget add on hota hai. So by just adding a decimal point to your budget, you can make your infrastructure accessible, and not just for the benefit of a person with disability, an old person who might be accessing public spaces, in, as I was saying, an expectant mother, young children, a lot of people that would otherwise not access the facilities that are being provided. So we strongly feel numbers ginna, implement karna framework, and significantly sensitize करना लोगों को. Sensitization का अगर मैं आप लोगों को एग्जांपल दूं, हमने जब NOWPDP का जो मेन कॉल टू एक्शन है वो है जॉब प्लेसमेंट्स. वी मेक श्योर कि मार्केट रेलेवेंट स्किल सेट्स बनाएं और माजूर अफराद बहा माजूरी को नौकरी में लगाएं, बिकॉज आप हैंड आउट तो देते रहते हैं चैरिटी का, but if you are not going to teach them how to fish and give them market relevant skill sets, everything is moot, everything is useless. There is no point of sustainable change. And I think the biggest challenge that we faced initially was कि जब हम लोगों को प्लेस करते थे 10-11 साल पहले, हमने जान पहचान की बिना पे प्लेस कर दिए बिकॉज ऑफ आवर ताल्लुकात. 2 महीने में उन लोगों को या तो साइड पे बिठा दिया या उनको फारिग कर दिया. Why? Because attitudinally speaking, the company wasn't ready to absorb them, and infrastructurally they were not ready. So फिर हमने अपनी अप्रोच को चेंज किया. हमने कहा कि यार पहले आप अपना आर्किटेक्चर तैयार करें, आप अपने लोगों को सेंसिटाइज करें, जो कि हम आके करेंगे. आप अपनी पॉलिसीज को इंक्लूसिव बनाएं. When your architecture, when your people when your policies are inclusive, then only are we going to add on persons with disabilities to your workforce. So there is sustainable change, and I think we are very grateful to around 150 plus companies across Pakistan, including the biggest banks, biggest textile companies, टॉप 6-7 एक्सपोर्टर्स जो हैं आपके पाकिस्तान के टेक्सटाइल के, वो हमारे साथ काम करते हैं. 15 से 16 बैंक्स हमारे साथ काम कर रहे हैं इस चीज पे. रिटेल कॉर्पोरेशंस काम कर रहे हैं, बट इट इज स्लो, बट वी आर स्टिल वर्किंग ऑन